Hello, everyone. Philosophy 71, Ancient Philosophy. This is week 8. Last night we had the Zoom meeting. Not many people were able to attend, but it was really good to see some of you, hear you, and we will probably do this again in 2 3 weeks. That's not a class, it's only a way to touch base, but I think it's important to do so. In any case, we are doing today again Plato, this time speaking about this other dialogue called Phaedo, and we did the Euthyphro last time, and the discussion board entry was about Socrates, right? Socrates' idea of justice in Euthyphro. This time, I ask you to briefly explain, go over the Phaedo, some sections that I will point out in a moment, and explain the theory of ideas or forms. Okay, I will begin with this in a moment, but also you can disregard I forgot to, when I revised the syllabus, the emergency syllabus, I forgot to delete the review discussion before the final exam. That section you can simply disregard that. Okay, so pay attention to the discussion board entry, suggestion, the pointer that I give, and again the key concepts for today are precisely theory of ideas or forms. Ideas or forms, it's the same notion, the same concept, and also I write as the title for the class for this week. Today actually tomorrow, April 30th and May 5th, Tuesday, May 5th. That's the body and the question of metaphysics. Okay, we spoke about metaphysics already at the beginning of this class. Fundamentally, right? Metaphysics is the study of the essence of reality, that which in reality is really real, to use Plato's language, that which ideally does not change, right? So there is this, that's the metaphysical split between a world of becoming, coming to be, passing away, change, right? And that's really what Plato's theory is about, the split between that right world plane of becoming, and then the world of being, B-I-N-G, where things don't change, the world for Socrates and Plato of ideas or forms. Remember, I said last time that this because we saw that applied in Euthyphro, speaking about the form of justice, which idea of justice, which makes all just actions just. Right, that's basically right the theory of ideas or forms. And remember, I said last time it is kind of counterintuitive in the sense that it's almost like looking at the world upside down in a situation in which you have, for example, many chairs, many tables, right? All these chairs, tables, people, trees, and so on and so forth. They are copies of a copy of many copies of the idea or form of the chair as such, if you will, with a capital C, the table as such with a capital T, chairness, tableness, the human as such, the humanness, okay, and so on and so forth, the tree as such, which would be treeness, this suffix, and this ness, meaning the condition of the state of the condition of being, right, in a certain way, right? We understand that, for example, powerfulness is the condition of being powerful, right, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in any case, read the Phaedo. The Phaedo has many themes. In any case, there is first of all the Phaedo, the pretext. Let's say the dialogue is about the last conversation the Socrates has with Phaedo and some other friends. Plato is not there. That's an interesting notation. He says that he himself writes the dialogue, but there is a moment in which he says Plato was not there, he was ill, right? And these are the last moments in Socrates' life. At the end of the Phaedo, we are not reading that together, but you should, the end, the final pages, moving pages where you see Socrates dying, right? He drinks the poison, the hemlock that they give him to drink. That's the method of execution. He's being executed in prison. He's going to then die, and so that is also described. But actually, this is interesting. Even before we get to the more philosophical question of right, the theory of ideas, forms. I mean, if you go to page 51 in your text and line 58 E, right? Then you see the Phaedo, this friend of Phaedo is giving the account. Right? Plato is writing the dialogue, but the account is given by Phaedo. Um, and he says, certainly, I certainly found being there an astonishing experience, although I was witnessing the death of one who was my friend, that's Socrates. I had no feeling of pity, for the man appeared happy, both in manner and words, and he died nobly and without fear, which is important, right, to the question of fear that we are probably going to see again when we do in the next weeks after we do Aristotle, then week 11 and week 12 when we do Epictetus and Lucretius. Keep this in mind. We will see this important question of the emotions and in particular of fear of the unknown, fear of death. And they will say there is no reason to fear death, and that's what already Socrates says, right? I mean, we haven't read the Apology, you can read it, but in the Apology he says the same. Death might be the greatest blessing of all. And actually, what's important is to live and lead an upright life, a decent life, a good life. That's more important than dying or not dying, right? I mean, so that's an important moment as well. And he speaks about this even in the Phaedo again on page 53, line 61. He speaks of, he says that what's important is to practice the art of philosophy, the art of philosophy, art of living and living well, right? I mean, that's what's important, not philosophy in any academic sense. I mean, of course, that's a very narrow understanding of philosophy, but philosophy is what, you know, aids us, helps us in life, and right, so that's basically what we see in Socrates. And then they speak about that, and then we get into the question of whether one is allowed to kill oneself or not, facing, a situation of difficulty, adversity, and so on and so forth. And the answer is no, but they get into this discussion. They say, Socrates himself says this is an appropriate topic for someone who is about to die. And they also say, when I say they, Socrates, Plato, Phaedo, giving the account, okay, that this is 62, page 54, line 62b, right? We men, humans, are in a kind of prison, right? Uh, and one must not free oneself or run away. That's, debatable, but that's what they say. But the prison here would be actually our earthly condition and the body, because for them the body is the prison for the soul. Problematic concept, but it's also very common and widespread, right? So in any case, let me, because I don't want to be too long, and so they make the argument, right? I mean, and actually, even here, Socrates says, if you go to still page 55, this time, but line 64, that's in the margins, you see the number, the letter, right? 64a, basically. So Socrates is making the argument, and he says, right? I mean, that. I think, as to why I think I'm reading that a man who has truly, I was saying that he says this in the apology somehow, who has truly spent his life in philosophy, right, is probably right to be of good cheer in the face of death, and to be very hopeful that after death he will attain the greatest blessings yonder. Okay, so again, whether this is actually the case or not, again, in the apology also he says death is either of these two things, right? You either sleep forever, a dreamless sleep, right? Or you move, you relocate from here to another place, and then it depends on the way you have led your life, right? I mean, this is again an idea common and widespread to other traditions as well. Those traditions that say that religious traditions that this life is only a passage into the truer life, the really real life after death, and so on and so forth. In any case, Socrates chooses this second option, that death might be actually this relocation from here to another place. His uh, you know, understanding of this is not necessarily religious but philosophical, but in any case, and we will see with Epictetus and Lucretius a different idea already with Aristotle in a sense, but certainly with Lucretius, especially the last philosopher we are doing this semester, we will see that the first option for him might be more sensible, right? That death is the end of whatever our perception, in the sense of our being individuals, constituted the way we are, and so on. So, but in any case, we'll speak about that later. And here, Socrates continues on the same page, same lines, 64. I am afraid that other people do not realize that the one aim of those who practice philosophy, again, the practice of philosophy, which is not simply, again, doing philosophy in an academic setting, right? I mean, but in life, right? In the proper manner, to practice philosophy in the proper manner is to practice for dying and death. Okay, which means that philosophy is supposed to give us the measure, the conditions for living a good life, and therefore moving also toward a good death. Okay, so that's basically the idea. And so then you see on page 58, 6, I'm sorry, the top of page 56, this is line C, right, 64C. This strange question that usually we don't ask. I mean, do we believe that there is such a thing as death? Socrates is asking, and this other friend of Socrates, student Simmias, says, yes, of course. I mean, of course, there is such a thing. What is it? Isn't it the separation? Socrates says of the soul from the body. They agree that this is the case. So we already move toward this very important moment in the Phaedo and in Socrates and Plato, that there is this separation, the body on the one hand, the soul on the other, which is the same form that I spoke of before, the same model, paradigm, right? The separation between, right, the plane, level, the world of becoming, coming to be, change, the body changes, and so on and so forth, right? And what remains the same, the world of a being, of unchanging ideas, or the soul, okay? That in the context, within the human context, then this metaphysical split is understood as this distinction between body and soul, which will then have a long, history in philosophy. Just to mention one name, in modern philosophy, if you take modern philosophy, you will see René Descartes, right, says has the same, but he's not the only one. It's a long tradition, and becomes the dominant tradition in whatever we call also the West. Okay, this separation between body and soul. Okay, so that's what death is, and then therefore the idea is that we have to stay away from the body as much as possible. Pleasure, the pleasures of sex, they even mention food and drink and so on and so forth. The true philosopher, Socrates says, despises all of these things, because to be within the body, ultimately that's the idea, which is again debatable, right? But that's what's been presented here, is always to be in a state of intoxication, and then one already by itself, just by being within the confines of the body, and so one doesn't want to intoxicate that even more by drinking, eating, and so on and so forth. Okay, so in any case, that's basically the idea, and um, the idea is that we can't see things, get knowledge through the body, the senses, right? Because very often, and this is again something that has a long history in philosophy, all the way to, like I said before, René Descartes, for example, that the body, the senses, right, seeing, hearing, and so on, the senses can, and very often they do, deceive us, right? I mean, I see something which maybe is not there, or it's different from what it seems to be, what appears to me. The sunrise, the sunset. I mean, it doesn't happen, right? The sun does not rise, although again, this is an appearance is not completely false. I mean, in the sense, it is true that I see this phenomenon. I mean, I see the sunrise. Not only do I see it, it's not because I'm not well today that I see it, but I can take a picture of it and post it on social media and so on and so forth. So it is something that doesn't have a full, if you will, degree of reality, but it's not completely false. It is an appearance of something, right? But so in any case, by way of if we rely on the body and on the senses, then we are going to be mistaken, and get knowledge which is not knowledge, right? False knowledge, and so on and so forth. So we had to move away from the body, and in order to grasp the truth. That's what you find at the end, the bottom of page 56. And I had to go kind of fast, but that's basically the idea, right? I mean, on page 57 again, we see that's the top of page 57, right? Line more or less 65, between C and D. Indeed, the soul, the soul reasons, thinks best when none of the senses troubles it, right? So I mean, if we stay away, if our mind stays away from the body, if that is possible at all, then we are, we have a greater, a cleaner, if you will, access to knowledge, the true perception of things. And so neither hearing nor sight, I'm reading, nor pain nor pleasure, but when it is most by itself, the mind, soul, but not soul in the other tradition that we usually think about, similar but not the same. Okay, so taking leave of the body as far as possible, having no contact or association with it in its search for reality. Okay, so again, we have to stay away from the senses, from the body, and only think with a pure, the pure mind. Okay, so and then they get into the question of ideas of forms. You see on the same page, right on page 57, line more or less D, right? That was line 65, D, between D and D. Do we say, right? This is Socrates asking one of his many questions, right? Do we say that there is such a thing as the just with a capital J itself, or not? The form of the just, okay? That we already saw in Euthyphro. The idea of the just, justness, the just as such, and the beautiful, and the good, all with capital letters, and they agree, right? I mean, Simmias in this case agrees, and then Socrates, asks another question again. And have you ever seen any of these things with your eyes? No, of course. I mean, you don't see the just as such. You don't see the beautiful. You can see a beautiful painting, a beautiful house, a beautiful sunset, but you don't see the beautiful as such, right? So that's basically the idea. Not with your own eyes, okay? So Socrates continues, ora have you ever grasped them with any of your bodily senses? I am speaking of all things such as bigness, not something big, I see something big, but bigness, health, strength, and in a word, right, the reality of all other things, that which each of them essentially is. Again, what something essentially, so to speak, inside, right, the real reality of something, right, that's the metaphysical type of language, is no, we don't see that. Again, I can see a strong person, but I don't see strength as such, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the idea is that we have, and that's line 66 on the same page, we had to use pure thought, using pure thought, okay? Or we had to approach the object with thought alone, again, away from the body, away from the bodily senses, if you will, in an abstract way, the way maybe we do when we think about, I don't know, abstractions like mathematics, notions of mathematics, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's basically the idea. So, but the question is, they really go against, and there is this denigration, honestly, of the body, right? Because they say, this is on line 58, line 67 almost B, that we need to write, escape the contamination of the body, of the body's folly, madness, insanity, right? The contamination. And again, as debatable, of course, and controversial as this is in modern philosophy, I mentioned people in the same tradition, right, like Descartes, but then you will have, I just mentioned one name, for example, Nietzsche, that again you will study if you study modern philosophy, or you might know about him, who has a completely different understanding of the body precisely, but he's not the only one. So, and we will see already in this, in the context of this class, when we do Lucretius, or we have seen already similar understandings, different understanding from the one we are looking at now in Plato, when we did the pre-Socratics, or Lao Tzu in Chinese philosophy, okay, where we don't find this attack against the body, this denigration of the body. But here, the question is that the soul, the mind, okay, again, not the soul in the religious sense, the soul is by itself apart from the body. That's the ideal condition for them. And then I will skip all this section also about not that it's not important, but the immortality of the soul. They will argue for the immortality of the soul, but we don't have much time. So read, especially again, once again, the highlighted parts. But I skip all this section and the question of again going from living to dying and vice versa, the immortality of the soul, and therefore also the idea of ultimately the transmigration of a soul. I mean, that has a function in Plato's philosophy as well. It has an important function in relation to knowledge, epistemology. If you remember, we spoke about this word at the beginning of the class, the way in which, and it is important in for us in the theory of ideas, two ideas or forms, the way in which, for example, some ideas are already in us, built in, right, innate, right? I mean, when we think, we learn something new. In reality, what happens is that we remember something that we already knew, before that, and then we forgot, at the moment of birth, and then it comes back. That's the theory of a recollection. Okay, learning is a recollection, recollecting, remembering, and this is part of the general theory of ideas. Okay, so pay attention to this. The theory of ideas or forms also has these moments of the theory of recollection, right? That again, when I learn something, I think I learned something new. In reality, I remember something that I was already in my mind, my soul, right? And then I forgot at birth, right? And so this moment of the theory of recollection, and also of what is called the theory of participation, sharing in, participating in, partaking in, right? The idea is, we will see that the relation between precisely ideas or forms and things in the sensible world is understood as this kind of a participation. I mean, in other words, something beautiful is beautiful because it participates, it shares in beauty or beautifulness. A chair is a chair because it participates in, shares in chairness, right? I hope that this is clear. A human being is a human being because a human being participates in or shares in humanness. The idea of being human, humanity, humanness, or the other way around. Socrates says, I'm not sure how this works, if it's a matter of participating in the idea, or if the idea is included, right? In other words, right, every chair would right have this idea of form, of chairness. The chair is such included within the human being, humanity, humanness included within, and so on and so forth. Okay. So this is what is important, but you find the idea of recollection already on page 64, line okay, uh, 73C. That's where they already speak, and I actually even the page before that, so 63 line, the lines around 73, right? I mean, line 73, page 63, right? When the word recollection is mentioned, right? That and he says precisely, Socrates, that he says that for us, right, learning is no other than recollection. Okay, I hope I made this clear already. We basically remember something that we uh, already knew, had known before. Okay, this recollection is occasion, triggered by experience, but it's not that we really learn anything. You will find this on page 64. And actually, the question on page 65, interesting question at the top of page 65, where have we acquired the knowledge of something like the equal? You know, I mean, we know that we understand that something is equal. The two things are equal to one another. One chair is equal to the other, and so on and so forth. The idea, the question is, whence have we acquired the knowledge of it? The answer is still on the same page, page 65, toward the bottom of that page, line 75, right? When where we read, we must then possess knowledge of the equal with a capital E before that time when we first saw the equal objects and realized that all these objects strive to be like the equal but are deficient in this, right? They fall short of being the equal as such, but they strive toward the equal. Something beautiful strives, a beautiful thing, a beautiful painting, a beautiful house strives to be like the beautiful as such, but it falls short of that, but still it participates in the beautiful. Okay, so but in any case, the question of how do we know all this, for example, how do we know that these things are equal? Because we already have again, I hope that this is clear, the idea of the equal in our mind. Okay, so that's basically the idea. That's part of the theory of ideas, and the moment in this part of is the theory precisely of okay, recollection. Okay, so the equal is an example, but then on the next page, Socrates uses other similar examples, not only the equal, but the greater, the smaller, the beautiful, the good, the pious, the just, that we saw already in the Euthyphro, and so on and so forth. So we forget all these things, again, as he says on page 66, right? I think we acquired this knowledge before birth, then lost it at birth, and then again we remember, right? We gain it back again. This is, of course, today we cannot take this too seriously, but some important implications of this can be seen in the fact that certainly the mind is equipped already with capacities that we don't, right, acquire by experience. I mean, I learn a language by studying that language, by practicing every day, and so on and so forth. But the ability, the capacity to learn any language whatsoever, right? Then that is already there to begin with. Okay, so that's basically the maybe important implication even today of this. Okay, so, but for them, these ideas are already in the mind or soul before we are born. Okay, you will find that as well. And then I skip some other sections and finish with, I just want to point out this moment, which is also very interesting. I mean, but again, read the whole thing. And another important page, a few pages, if you go to page 85, and then it continues on page 86, where precisely there is this other great example, illustration of the theory of ideas using the question, the concept of the beautiful, right? When we see on page again 86, line 100b, that Socrates says, I assume, right, the existence of a beautiful capital B itself, by itself, a good capital G, and a great capital G, and all the rest. Okay, and so, and then read those lines highlighted between line C and E. Really very interesting. I mean, Socrates again is here kind of playful even with language, and at the bottom of page of this page, the bottom of page 87, he says, and I stop there, it is through beauty, with a capital B, that beautiful things are made beautiful. As I said before, the idea in Socrates, the theory of ideas or forms in Socrates, Plato, is that again, either beautiful things, for example, participate, right, take part in the beautiful as such, in beauty, or beauty is the same, the one idea of a beauty. For them there aren't many, right, contrary to what Aristotle will say. One idea of beauty, one idea of the good, one idea of the chair, and so on and so forth, right? This one idea is again included perhaps in every single instance, individual instance of a beautiful thing, of a good thing, a good action, of a chair, of a human being, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I hope that this gives you a sense of on page 87 they even say, Socrates says, how even two, what makes two things two rather than one is precisely two-ness. One is oneness, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's basically the idea of the universal and the relationship between the universal, right, idea one, and the particular, many particular things. Okay, so I hope that this gives you some ideas, that by then reading this dialogue, give a sense of what you understand of the theory of ideas or forms. Then you can write about the other things as well, the question of right, the question of death and philosophy as a preparation for dying and death, and so on and so forth, and read the end of the dialogue, where you find again Socrates himself dying. Okay, so then see you. I mean, I will upload another video next time, next week, for week 9 will be, I believe, Aristotle, on Aristotle. Okay, all right, see you, bye, thanks.